on, guys? Welcome to another episode of Bro History. It's Henry Zamota and Danny Abdel-Jabbar. What's up, my friend? How are you?
Chilling, man, as per usual. How about yourself?
I'm doing pretty good. I have a question for you.
What's that?
How often do you think about the Roman Empire?
Daily. Isn't that like the joke?
Well, my wife asked me, and this trend was going on, like 6 months ago, a year ago?
Something like that. Yeah.
when I'm sure, people with wives or guys with wives and girlfriends were subjugated to this. When asked, I said, I think about it all the time. What do you want to know? And then I went into like a whole thing about well, I often find myself thinking about the late Republic. Some people compare the United States as Rome in the late Republic. It's either that or the Soviet Union. But what I find fascinating is actually the power conflict between Lucius Cornelius Felix, a.k.a. Sulla, and Gaius Marius, who used his dictatorial powers from dramatic and then he was like, wow, I really wish I didn't ask you that and didn't get into this trend.
Yeah, she probably asked the wrong person this question.
But yeah, I mean, I think about Rome all the time. How do you not? It's such a incredible civilization, and it has such an insane history.
Yeah. I mean, it's touched basically everything we know, in one way or another.
Have you ever been to Rome?
I haven't. The most I've done in Italy is northern Italy in Südtirol or Torino. I haven't been in the south of Italy, so I can't tell you what it looks like.
Well, you are missing out, and we'll get to that. But yeah, I was in Italy for my honeymoon. That's the only time that I've ever been.
Mm-hmm.
And Rome is awesome. Obviously, if you like to travel, you like historic cities. If you're into, here was like the constant theme that I saw in Rome. I saw like a dad and his like teenage daughter, and I saw like 20 of these. And
dads and their teenage daughters.
Yeah, and the dad's like super fascinated by everything, and he's like, "Oh, let's go over here." And then the daughter is like, "Dad, I just want to get something to eat." Like, "Dad, can we stop walking?" I saw about like 10 of those pairings while I was in Rome. But
That's
I mean, I was
hilarious.
the same way. Like, it's incredible, like seeing the Colosseum,
all the old shit. Yeah.
and all the old shit, to explain it crudely. But today is kind of going to be like it's going to be different from the usual topics we cover. We haven't really done an ancient history podcast in a long time. And let me tell you how this came about, like how I got interested in this topic. I was like, I've been telling everyone that I've been focusing a lot on World War II history, and specifically the origins of World War II. And I've been looking a lot at what A.G.P. Taylor, one of the big World War II historians from the 60s and 70s, what he had called the German problem. And he didn't coin the term, but he definitely popularized it. And the German problem was basically when Germany unites from a bunch of confederated principalities into one state, it just completely throws the European balance system for a loop, and it causes all these other states to form alliances and to pursue more aggressive foreign policies, and then you end up with World War I. I'm definitely summarizing it in a very crude way,
yeah.
but that's the kind of like the basic premise of it. When Germany unites, it creates problems. So what I was interested in doing was that I wanted to explore the German problem from its ancient roots. And I ended up going all the way back to, usually when people talk about the German problem, they start around like Charlemagne.
Yep.
And like the rise and fall of the Holy Roman Empire and how it split into multiple kingdoms or states. And then, after that, Germany is basically just a bunch of principalities, and it's kind of trampled on by other powers, at least these states. And there's other dominant principalities that form, but ultimately they don't really unite until the 19th century. So what I wanted to explore, and this is like not even related to what we're going to be speaking with today, but I just want to explain my thought process of how I get one place to another. I was looking at, okay, so when did like a proto-Germanic identity start to form?
Mm.
And I was like, maybe we should explore how Rome's relationship with the Germanic tribes of the north, because Rome constantly had problems subjugating the Germanic tribes. Like eventually, their frontier, expanded to its limit in Germania. Like there were some parts of Germania that was part of Rome, but other parts, further north in the frontier did not become part of Rome. So I always found that interesting. And of course, these tribal chieftains, they band together. Not they don't band together, but during the fall of the empire, basically these tribal chieftains became the actual real powers in the Roman Empire, and they started to
Mm-hmm.
rule Rome from afar. So
Right.
they were excluded from like the Senate, but they controlled Rome through these puppet dictators, and this eventually leads to the collapse of society essentially. So I wanted to explore that, but first, to understand that, you have to understand what was Rome's foreign policy to begin with. Like, how did they integrate with other conquered peoples?
Mm-hmm.
So that was the question I found myself diving into, and now I'm all the way back to Romulus and Remus. So it's hard to do when you have horrible ADHD like I do. It's hard to concentrate on one thing and to stay focused, and you find yourself falling down all these rabbit holes. But
Well,
I
this is
want to
bro
talk
history,
about
so I mean, our
yeah
90% of our show is rabbit holes. So,
yeah.
so people who are listening
So
to this for a while know.
I wrote something. So we set it up a Substack, and I wrote something in it that kind of does an
Mhm.
overview of Rome's policy on barbarians. It's like a 5-minute read, and it's just kind of like a brief overview of how Rome would work with foreign tribes and how the failure in that policy eventually led to their collapse. But I'm going to be concentrating not on the north, the tribes outside of Italy, more so inside. But I kind of want to lay the groundwork of like what is a barbarian in
Right.
ancient times, and it's from ancient Greece. So in ancient Greece, all non-Greek races, and they consider them races, were called barbarians. Even if were from a respectable civilization like the Phoenicians or Egyptians, you were a barbarian. You were a foreigner or an outsider. And the word barbarian, it comes from a derogatory intimidation of foreign dialects. So
Right.
anyone who didn't speak Greek just sounded like they were saying bar, bar, bar. I think a
Right.
lot of people know that story.
Mm-hmm.
We actually have a recording. So this recording was put together by a team of about 300 historians from the University of Cambridge, and they wanted to capture what foreign dialects sounded like, back in the 5th century BCE. So they took all the recorded languages and they put them into this AI simulator, and it kind of spread out like what those languages sounded like. So
Right.
we're gonna play it because it's really fascinating.
All right. Let's play it from the beginning and we'll listen through.
Es war einmal in einem kleinen Städtchen, da lebte ein Mädchen namens Barbara. Und diese Barbara war im ganzen Land für ihren abartig guten Rhabarberkuchen bekannt. Ja, man konnte sagen, dass Barbaras Rhabarberkuchen ohne Wenn und Aber gar eine geradezu magische Erfahrung war. Abracadabra, ja, dieser Kuchen war geradezu bombastisch. Und die Nachfrage danach erstarkte drastisch. Barbara eröffnete noch im selben Jahr eine Bar und nannte sie Barbaras Rhabarberbar. In der Stadt gab
So this
es auch
came out of
the
Department of Ancient Studies at Cambridge University that deals with the classical period of Greece. So they actually went back and they took all the recorded text that they could find. They also referenced the Greek historians and the Roman historians, and they put this together in a simulator. And that is with about 95% accuracy, that is what a foreigner sounded like in to the Greeks. Bar. Bar.
In all seriousness, this is a viral video song, TikTok trend, whatever you want to call it. It came out like late 2013, and it's by a group, Bodo Vartke, a guy named Bodo Vartke, featuring Marty Fisher, and it's basically one of the many German tongue twisters, and it's the absurd story of Barbara, her barbarian friends, their barber, the eponymous bar, and all of Barbara's unbelievable tasty rhubarb pie. And when you say that in English, it actually sounds pretty bar as well. But that song is really catchy, and definitely recommend you listen to it if you haven't already.
I'll be honest. I'm definitely like an American Anglican chauvinist, where that's like basic what all foreign dialects sound to me. So that's what the ancient Greeks were
that's what they were talking
when
about.
When they spoke to foreigners. But all right, with all seriousness, so barbarian, it wasn't just a linguistic category. It was anyone who fell outside of Greek society, meaning people who were not part of the structure of the polis, the city-state. It was also a pejorative that, one Greek would call another Greek when they were acting like barbarians. It was like a slur. Those Spartans are acting like barbarians. Sorry if there's a clap sound. There's a mosquito right by me, and I'm trying to kill it. So I'll just let it bite me. So, this classification as citizen versus foreigner, it makes sense when you consider how the geography of ancient Greece is shaped, or at least how it shaped their perception of outsiders. So Greek city-states, they were scattered across islands, and they were surrounded by mountains, and these barriers made large-scale agricultural production difficult, leading to these isolated, self-sufficient communities and cultures. Outside of Athens, most Greek city-states didn't even have much contact with foreigners. Thus, they never really made an effort to integrate barbarians, in quotes, into their societies. And over time, their own, cultural achievements led them to believe in a sense of like their own racial supremacy. Aristotle believed that Greeks were a synthesis of, Northern European vigor and then Eastern Asian intellect. So Greek societies took the best traits from both worlds. They were a combination of like the IQ of the East and the martial spirit of the North. And the reason why they were dominant is they had both traits. And the Asians, they didn't have the same martial spirit, and the Northern Europeans, they lacked the intelligence to form sophisticated civilizations. So
that's
that was
pretty
a view from
interesting. So
Aristotle.
that makes me the ideal human being, because like I am Puerto Rican and Palestinian, right? So I cover like the entire planet basically. Like if you trace my roots, it's probably on 4 or 5 different continents. So does that mean I'm either the best or the worst, right? According to the Greeks, I guess I'd be the best.
You're kind of like that. You're like a future demographic in like 50 years or 100 years, when there's no more white people and everyone's the same shade of same color.
Everyone's gonna look like me, man.
That's what you. Everyone's gonna look like you.
Mm-hmm. That's okay. I look great.
We're all gonna be Danny Abdel-Jabbars.
Yeah.
But so just pulling this back, when the Greeks, they first come across the Italic tribes of Italy, and they come across them, Greek colonies were formed in Italy, from like 800 BCE on, but they start to really come in contact with them around like the 4th and 5th century BCE. So when they come across the Italians, the Italian tribes, who are the forebears of Roman society, they too were called barbarians.
Mm-hmm.
And Italic communities at this time, they were organized around kinship ties rather than a centralized city states, or at least most societies. There were some sophisticated city states, but for the most part, Italy was just a bunch of warring tribes that would fight each other for turf.
Right.
And the reason why Italy was like this is because of the geography. So in Italy, you have the Apennine Mountains. They divide the country into isolated regions, leading to the formation of these different tribes, such as the Latins, the Etruscans, the Sabines, the Samnites. And then for centuries, these tribes were in conflict with one another. This dynamic of, quote unquote, living in this like hostile neighborhood, it forces Rome to adopt this pragmatic approach to dealing with outsiders. Because I guess, I asked you earlier if you have ever been to Italy. If you haven't gone, you should go because Italy's beautiful. It's an attractive place to settle or to migrate to, except Naples. If Naples, Naples, I think if the word shithole comes from someone describing Naples, it looks
Careful.
like it is one of the most dilapidated, ugliest cities I've ever been in my entire life. It looks like Tampa, Florida, if Tampa were hit with a Category 5 earthquake.
Yeah, that's not even how they measure earthquakes, and that's hilarious.
Well, they measure. This is what hit Naples. I guess what Category 5 hurricane, right? Either
Right.
or. It looks like Naples after some disaster, or Tampa after some disaster.
We just lost all of our Naples-born subscribers.
They'll be like, "Yeah, you're right. This place is a complete shithole." Outside of Naples is awesome. The surrounding landscape and the Amalfi Coast, which is close to Naples, and Mount Vesuvius, that's all awesome. But Naples itself is I'll be honest, most Italian cities and villages, besides the big tourist attractions, they're not very nice. Like, just take a train ride from one Italian city to another Italian city. You're going to find, honestly, like, it looks kind of like San Juan. Like, if you drive from, the airport to San Juan, you'll pass some projects. It kind of looks like that. Same climate and everything.
Hey, you're pissing everybody off now. Why don't you stop while
not
you're
to
behind?
Not to offend my Italian listeners
Or Puerto Ricans, for that matter.
or Puerto Ricans. All right, so whatever. I think they'll have a good laugh. So, to the point I was making, Italy's nice. It attracts a lot of migrants. A lot of people come through the Alps to settle there, and Rome is located in the heart of central Italy on the Mediterranean basin, making it a very tempting place to plunder. So it's right next to a major river, the Tiber. Barbarian tribes used to travel these river systems and ransack the city. In Rome, near Rome, there's like these surrounding hills that do offer some defense, but nothing like the mountainous terrain in Greece. In the north, the Alps, they were a barrier, but they also served as a gateway for invasions from these early Gallic and or Celtic or Celtic tribes. And after crossing the Alps, these tribes would find themselves on the Po Valley, which is essentially like a highway into central and southern Italy. So it was this route that the Gallic warlord Brennus most likely took when he sacked Rome in 387 BC, creating the most humiliating event in Roman history, with maybe the exception of the actual, fall of the empire. In the words of, I have the quote from the historian Livy, "This disaster was the most serious and shameful experience which had befallen them. This disaster was the most serious and shameful experience which had befallen them up to that time." So the sacking of Rome in 380 BC, it fucks with the Roman psyche. It fucks with their psyche and their mental state. And, they start to pursue this. Well, they were already militaristic, but they started to expand even more than they did. And Brennus, the warlord that conquers Rome, or at least he occupies it for a little bit. Um, you can argue how realistic it would have been for him to hold on to Rome, given that there were still legions that existed that were ready to fight him, but they eventually just paid him off. So Brennus leaves. They give him his ransom, and then he goes on to pursue other barbarian opportunities.
Yeah,
Other barbarian opportunities.
Mm-hmm. So
but
you're saying, like, okay, Italy historically and arguably to today is super beautiful place. Like, when did people started migrating to Italy, and not like the barbarians, but like the, like, when did they start going there?
So Indo-European tribes migrated to Italy around the second millennium BCE. So, I mean, this stuff is always up to debate, and they're always finding new evidence. And I'm no expert in like early human migration patterns, but I think the popular consensus among historians is they come around the second, 2000 BCE. That's when like these major migrant flows start to come into Italy, and these groups included the Italic tribes, who would later turn into these different civilizations across the peninsula. And there are many different ones, but the more well-known ones are the Sabines, the Samnites, and the Latins, and then the Etruscans. But the Etruscans weren't Latin speakers, but the Etruscans were kind of like the major powerhouse, the most advanced civilization prior to Rome becoming dominant. In addition to these Italic-speaking tribes, there were these Greek colonies sprinkled throughout the southern coast of Italy, and then also in Sicily as well. Sicily was like a major trading hub, and Naples was a very important Greek city. The city actually, Polis, actually means new city in Greek.
Oh, so that's why it sucks so much. It's a Greek city, right?
I guess why. I mean, when I was walking around Naples, I was like, man, a bunch of these people look like, a bunch of these guys look like fucking gangsters. Like everything is broken. There's graffiti everywhere. Maybe I was just in a bad part of town, because some people have told me that I should stay there. I just visited for a day, and I didn't stay much longer. Because I was staying in Sorrento, which is like 30 minutes away from, like 30 minutes away from Naples. But I digress. So to take this back to the origin story of Rome. So Rome was allegedly founded in 753 BCE by Romulus. And Romulus is about as real as King Arthur.
Okay.
And the story is, he founded Rome after killing his twin brother Remus. He was raised by wolves. Do you want to hear something fucked up?
Sure, always.
About Roman mythology? So, according to legend, the city was primarily populated by men. And these men were outlaws and fugitives and adventurers. They were riffraff. So it was this rough city. And Romulus realized that Rome, not having any women, would not be able to sustain itself.
All right, so it was a sausage fest.
It was a giant sausage fest. The problem was the neighboring tribes, in particular the Sabines, refused to allow their daughters to marry Romans.
I don't blame them.
So in response, this is the story. Romulus has this big party. He invites all the neighboring tribes, including the Sabines, to this festival to honor one of their many gods. I forget which one.
Okay.
And at this festival, Romulus gives his signal. Think of Game of Thrones' Red Wedding. And he gives a signal, and then all the Romans come out and they kidnap all the women.
The fuck?
They kidnap specifically the Sabine young women.
Okay.
And in popular history, this event is called the rape of the Sabine women. That is that is the title of the event. And so what happens is that these women were forcibly taken back to Rome, and they were forced to marry the men, and they became the mothers of Roman children. It kind of makes the legend, the story of Helen of Troy sound tame. And there's
Yeah,
some
it's
other weird stories in Roman history. There's a story from the Punic War of this Roman legion that lands on this island,
mhm.
and instead of fighting, they decide to just ransack the island and kill all the men and marry all the women, and
And
then
by
just stay
marry, you
there.
mean like rape, right? Because they weren't
Yeah,
doing
I mean,
this
just
willingly.
kill. I mean, just act like a bunch of cavemen and kill all the men, and then take in their family and start families with the remaining women.
Jesus.
And then it was a problem where the Romans like had to go after them for insubordination. It's this weird story out of the Punic War. I think it may have been the island of Syracuse. I might be getting my history wrong. But as you can imagine, going back to this specific rape, this starts a war. However, when the war reaches its climax, the Sabine women, having grown to love their Roman husbands, rush between the fighting armies, pleading with their fathers and brothers on one side and their new husbands on the other to stop fighting. They didn't want to see their new husbands and the fathers of their children killed, but they couldn't see their own fathers and brothers and cousins slaughtered. So this intervention leads to peace, and the Sabine king agreed to co-rule Rome with Romulus, and the Sabines became part of Roman society.
Tell me,
So it
tell
has a
me
nice.
tell me the story wasn't invented by a man without telling me the story was invented by a man. Like, that's some bullshit. That shit did not happen.
Well, of course, it was invented by a man. It was fucking. The story was invented 3,000 years ago, or not 3,000 years ago, but you know, uh, 2,500 years ago.
No, it's just like, that's some bullshit. That's like some of the biblical stories. What's that one biblical story where it's like the guy has two young daughters, and I forget this guy's name. He has like two young daughters, and one day, according to this story, the daughters were getting him like drunk, and then they raped him in a cave, and then they got pregnant or something like that, and then he didn't get in trouble because he was drunk and they raped him. When the actual story is probably he was raping his daughters, which is fucked up, right? So it's just the way that they wrote this, or the way that they tell this story smells like some bullshit to me. I don't think that's the
Well,
way
how
it went
many
down.
how many how many stories about Zeus turning into an animal to rape somebody
Yeah, he's a
are
fucking
there?
serial rapist. Yeah, it's
Like
fucked
all
up.
these guys were like raping women, and not just raping women, but they were like turning into like bulls and stuff and rape like just fucked up stuff.
Yeah.
But you know what? We shouldn't judge
Yeah,
these
no, we should.
cultures
No,
with the
no, no.
morality of the present age. All
No, we
right.
totally
I
should.
think I think we should. I think we need to be more sensitive to cultural differences.
Nah.
Um,
Not when it comes to rape. Sorry. I drew the line there.
well, the irony of this is that, or what makes this funny. Obviously, rape's not funny, but what makes this funny is that this was a story that meant to, um, legitimize Rome's founding.
Mm-hmm.
It was a value building story,
You mean it really
and
didn't happen, is what you're saying.
it meant to tell a positive story about
Right.
building alliances
Through rape.
through
Jesus.
through abducting women. Yes,
Fucked up.
wouldn't play well to modern audiences, but
No.
at the time, it meant something. Okay, at the time of the story was written or told orally, it had people felt something. They're like, oh, I guess it is good to, rather than kill each other, we should build alliances. That was the point of the story.
All right.
And
All right.
given Rome's policy with foreigners and other Italic tribes over the following years, I think it worked. I think the message got across.
All right. Well,
Um,
enough with the bullshit story. What's the actual history around the founding of Rome, or at least so far as we know?
all right, so there's no definitive answer to Rome's historical founding. But there are a few key theories. So I'm not really up to date with like the archaeological evidence and all that type of stuff because they're frequently finding new things. When I was in Italy just 2 years ago, they were doing this big archaeological dig, and it was like a big one. They were finding rare shit. But it's not 100% clear. But there's like theories that are commonly accepted. So T.J. Cornell, who's like a big Roman historian, he basically says that Rome wasn't founded by a single individual or a single group for that matter. It was just kind of like a confederation of villages that were next to each other, and these various tribes they banded together and they formed a more urbanized area around the 8th century BCE. And it's not as an exciting story as Romulus and Remus and this abduction story of women, but I mean that's probably what happened. Another theory is there's other theories as well. So John Hall, which is like another big ancient historian or classical historian, he said that the Romans came from the Etruscans, and the Etruscans were like the hegemony before the Roman Empire or the Roman Republic developed into the primary power of Italy. The Etruscans controlled basically like all of like Western Italy and like north north of north of Rome. Like that was all their territory. So basically, the Romes were kind of like an offshoot of Etruscan civilization because Roman and Etruscan like architecture and stuff, and a lot of like uh, religious and ceremonial practices are very similar. So they said that they're kind of an offshoot of that. Most likely, the scenario, what I think, is that there was a gradual merging of different tribal settlements, and they took influence to the neighboring Etruscans and then the Greek colonies that were nearby as well. And that's how the state developed, because there were Greeks coming and going as well, bringing like Greek political ideas there. And Rome's location on the Tiber River gave it access to the Mediterranean Sea, allowing it to become this central trading hub and allowing them to also just allowing them to contact other civilizations or other civilizations, sending people there. So that is the most likely story now, or the most likely scenario, or the most likely history. Rome was a kingdom first before becoming a republic. So the city was ruled by a series of different kings from different tribes. And the last king, the Etruscans were typically, they had a lot of Roman king, because Rome's a place, So a lot of times there would be an Etruscan king. And the last king of Rome was this tyrannical Etruscan king. And he alienated the noble class. Here's another story, and these come from the ancient historians, but here's the legend. So the king, his name was Lucius Tarquinius Superbus. He kidnapped a powerful noble's wife. Yeah,
Superbus.
Superbus. I think it's Superbus. Whatever.
Superbus it is. I like that. Let's do it.
Superbus. He kidnapped a powerful noble's wife.
Oh, par for the course.
And raped her.
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't actually him. It was his son. So the prince. So they abducted this noble's wife. They raped her, and this sets off this massive rebellion. And according to the story, and again, this is another legend, most of our accounts from this era come from Livius, the Titus Livius, and then Polybius. Livius was, he provides most of the historical narrative, and Polybius explains a lot of how like Roman institutions worked. But back to the story. So this woman's name was Lucretia. She was a noblewoman known for her virtue. She's raped by Sextus Tarquinius, the son of the last Etruscan king. And after this event, she's overcome with shame. And this shame, when she confesses this or tells her family what happened, this shame leads to her suicide. So the suicide fuels this revolt that's led by Lucius Junius Brutus. And Brutus is a very famous name in Rome. And her husband, Lucius Tarquinius Collatinus, which will ultimately overthrow the monarchy. And one of the reasons why these names are important, because a lot of the families that go on to control Rome after the monarchy is overthrown, they actually are really the levers of power within the Roman state. So early Rome is dominated by 30 great families. And I'm not going to go through all the families, but
why not? I'm kidding.
The ones that people are probably heard of, they've looked into this, are the Valeri, the Fabii, the Fabians, which are probably the most famous one, the Claudi, the Papyri, the Juni, the Junis, which Brutus comes from. These 30 great families, the patriarchs of these families were basically the Roman Senate. And Rome's political system was a blend of these formal institutions and informal patron-client networks. So going back to the start of the Republic, which starts at 509 BC, Roman citizens were classified into two orders: patricians and then plebeians. The patricians represented the elite class, the nobles, whose ancestors had held high offices of state and in priesthood, and they alone at the time, at the founding of Rome, they were the only ones who had the right to hold.
Is this where the word patriarch comes from, by the way? Patrician?
Yes.
Interesting.
I'm making that up, but it sounds right.
Yeah, let's go with that. I like that.
I'm pretty sure. I just assumed it did. I never actually confirmed that.
It sounds right.
But a lot of these terms. So plebs.
Mm-hmm. Plebeian.
Pleb is something that you call plebs, like the uneducated masses is what we call plebs today, right? Mm-hmm. That comes from the plebeians, the plebeian stat. Actually, our Patreon memberships, one of them was, the lowest membership was called plebeian, I think.
Yeah.
So the plebeians, they're the common man. So the farmers, the artisans, the merchants, they did not have the right to have political offices, but they had the right to vote for their own representation, the tribune of the plebs. The tribune of the plebs. And tribunes had the power to veto actions of the Senate. In addition, and these are things that made Roman society unique, is that the plebs, let me pull this back. Roman society was unique because there was like social mobility within it. So plebs could marry upward. They could marry into noble families. And eventually, not immediately, but I think around like 300 BCE or so, plebs could even be elected into the consul position. And then, they would also receive, spoils of war and things like that, slaves and stuff. So Rome is a society which allows for upward mobility. And what's interesting is that by the time of the Punic War, so 260 BCE, most of the Roman aristocracy was not of the original patrician elite. So it was like very fluid, almost like, what our society is how our society is today. Like there was like new money coming in,
Hmm.
so there was, the middle class was, eventually could become billionaires. Um, so you could move up through society through merit, and they generally
Basically,
like
if you were to
slaves.
marry the Jeff Bezos of Rome, you could also become an elite. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, if you were a successful artisan or something, or if you had a big estate or proved yourself in war, you had a chance to marry into like a noble family.
Yeah, I
So
guess
there
what's
was a
important to point out is that all of this is relative, right? So there's probably ridiculous amounts of inequality in this time period, but the idea that's unique and different was that, caste systems traditionally around the world, and especially in the ancient world, if you're born into a caste, you live and die in that caste, and there's not really a whole lot that you could do about that, with very limited exceptions. Whereas Rome, at least there was this option, right? Like you might have some upward mobility, and comparatively, that was huge, for the ancient world.
Yeah, and there was they respected uh meritocracy. So if you were able to prove yourself and were very valuable to society, then you would move up among the political and social ranks. Even slavery, and this is going to sound controversial, but this is like something that's kind of commonly said among classical historians, is that slaves in Rome, much different from slaves as we know it in the modern world, or from the 16th century on in America, much different than cattle slavery. Roman slaves would often be freed and then granted full citizenship. And historians go as far to say that the institution of slavery was actually a mechanism that was used to assimilate people in the Roman society before granting them citizenship.
Hmm.
Now, there's a spectrum. If you're a slave to a noble and you're basically like handling his affairs and his personal assistant, and you know do things on his behalf, um, that's the type of slave that would be granted citizenship. If you
Right,
were a slave and you were in a salt mine, then most likely you would die very young and had a horrible life.
right.
So there was obviously a spectrum, but
But
there
again,
was there was
the
upward
unique part about
mobility.
this is that it's uniquely different from, slavery that we think of today. And then there was opportunities for this. I can't believe I'm making a case for this was okay. It wasn't okay. It was still bad. Slavery's still bad. But it's interesting that you say that some historians are saying that they use this as a way to like force assimilate people into the Roman society before they become citizens. I mean, if you look at like contemporary examples, I mean, it's kind of like, that weird in between green card status that a lot of like people in America have, right? Like they're not quite citizens, and you have to go through all these bells and whistles and jump through all these hoops in order to become a citizen. So I guess that's not too alien a concept, except even those people have rights, and I'm not really certain what the rights of slaves in Rome were. Probably not very much.
Well, the point is, it varied, and if you had a good master, then there was a chance that you could break the bonds or break the chains of slavery, and be integrated into be a respected citizen of Rome. Um, these types of slaves probably had it better off than a serf who
Mm,
lived in the Russian Empire in the
mm,
1800s.
mm.
So
Interesting.
it's just, there's different ways that you can look at it. Um, Now, the way that Roman government was structured, so there was two key assemblies. There was the centuriate assembly, and then there was the tribal assembly. The centuriate assembly was based on the Roman army structure. Those members were landowners, and it elected high officials of the state. The tribal assembly was based on residents. So citizens were registered in one of 35 tribes or large districts, and this assembly voted on legislation.
Okay, so like the Senate and the House, basically.
Yeah, exactly. So in addition, these assemblies were they had various levels of elected magistrates, and these magistrates were restricted by rules such as their age. You couldn't be there was an age limit. I think you had to be over 40. It might be 40 or 45. Class. There was different rules about who could be and who couldn't be, and then there was also rules to prevent the concentration of power. So there was term limits.
Oh, wow.
So you couldn't
the Romans
go on.
had term limits? We should learn a thing or two about that.
Yeah, they had term limits. And then, there was all these checks on powers because Roman society was extremely competitive. So everyone was paranoid that, people would be assembling power and trying to overtake one another. So they had these checks and balance systems to prevent one man or one person from becoming too powerful. From time to time, when in states of emergency, the Romans would elect a dictator, but that dictatorship came with a term limit. So that's what made the fall of the Republic with Julius Caesar so unprecedented, because Caesar basically made himself dictator for life, which did away with all the previous precedents. And obviously there was that precedent was set before Caesar took power, but that's why it was that's essentially why he was murdered by his Senate. So offices were elected annually, and in the case of a dispute, the negative vote won to limit power. And then, age and class restrictions applied. Particularly only members of noble families were seen as suitable for political and military command. And this structure benefited the 30 great families, providing them with opportunities to hold office and gain wealth and, increase their influence. And what's interesting is that, there was two consuls, and consuls commanded armies. And often they would command the same army together, and they would alternate, leadership. They would because they didn't want one consul become, it's like electing two presidents to check each other. But these presidents would happen to be military commanders. So this would actually lead sometimes to difficult situations on the battlefield, which was the case of the Battle of Cannae, when allegedly 80,000 legionnaires were encircled by Hannibal and slaughtered over the course of a day.
Like a situation of too many cooks in the kitchen, kind of.
Yeah, too many cooks in the just like two generals not acting,
not agreeing, right?
Not acting as one and just doing their own thing. So the real political institution that had the power was the Senate. The Senate became the key institution. It was former magistrates, and they acted as the Republic's, advisory body through its influence. And, magistrates were cautious in proposing radical changes because they aspired a place in the Senate. So the Senate dominates the state during Rome's, expansionist years. And really, the Republic's success in kind of expanding its sphere of influence was due to this
hierarchical organization,
structure.
Right.
So I don't know why I can't say that word.
It's a tough one.
And there was these political consensus and these social bonds that kind of tied all these classes together. Now, it's important to note, because now we're going to talk about, how Rome expanded into other neighborhoods, essentially. Rome didn't have this official policy of Romanization, but Rome's flexibility and hierarchy-based system allowed it to create and this very effective patron-client network with other Italian tribes. And essentially, they would offer, they had this ability to offer social mobility within its own society. It made it easier for Rome to extend similar relationships to external tribes by offering pathways to the social and political advantages, even for non-Romans. So they created this system that encouraged loyalty from its clients. Senators, many of who were former magistrates, they would use their influence within government to build these relationships with these foreign tribes. So these local tribal leaders, or even cities, like these local city states, or just societies in general, they could align themselves with powerful Roman senators, effectively ensuring their political survival.
Hmm.
The Italian tribes and they were called Italian allies who supported Rome. They had the same, they received the spoils of war as well. Thus, these foreign communities, and when I say foreign, I'm still talking about the Italic tribes and the Etruscans, the other people who inhabited Italy. There was this tangible benefit in maintaining their client status. So through this system, this patron system, this goes, and I'm talking about the years of the early and middle republic, so 509 to 264 BCE. Rome is united, or Rome unites Italy into a confederation. They control about 65% of the Italian peninsula. And, this population is divided into four major legal categories. So Roman citizens, citizens without franchise. So basically citizens without the right to vote, and then Latins, and then Italian allies. That's how, people are divided across this Roman, NATO, essentially. It's like Roman NATO in Italy.
Let me see if I can break this down, because you said a lot of really interesting stuff. So basically, Rome sets up this really interesting style of government, right? Where they encourage upward social mobility within certain parameters. And that gives all of the Roman people kind of a lot of incentive to, work their way up, right? And guarantee kind of getting all the spoils of war and all the benefits of being involved in the government. Then they take that same model and they start offering it to their neighbors, right? The other Italic tribes, all the other peoples that were on the Italian peninsula. And they're like, hey, you guys can also get cut in on this stuff. We're doing great things over here. And some of those tribes would, make friends with these people in high up places in the Roman government, because they get a lot of benefit out of it, right? They get a lot of probably trade and different spoils of war. And they also guarantee that they won't get invaded or something crazy. So everyone's starting to get in on the game, and the game basically pits the people against each other, right? And creates that system of checks and balances that you're saying, right? Everybody wants a bigger slice of the pie. So they're all working with each other, but kind of against each other at the same time. And it attracts more and more people together from this region, such that at a certain juncture, the Roman influence grows so large that it becomes this confederation. Did I get that all right?
Yeah. So it's kind of like a mafia, like a mob family or organized
sounds
crime.
like it. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Where they would basically move into a civilization. They would say, hey, you can either be our client, you could supply us with, because mainly in their expansion efforts, the goal was to increase the size of their military.
Right.
That
Like,
was like one of their
hey,
primary
nice farm you
objectives.
got here. Be a shame if something bad would happen to it, right?
Yeah, that's essentially how it happened. And what makes it unique is that it wasn't like there was this one console or one, this is a decentralized system in some regard. I mean, it's a centralized government, but there's not this powerful executive branch. So
Not
you
yet,
have
at
like a
least.
legislative body that's carrying all this out. And this legislative body is dominated by these powerful families. So these powerful families would create have their own clients throughout
Cut these
Italy.
deals, basically. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So they would, yeah, exactly. So these families would go in and they would cut a deal with the city state. And, if they didn't cut a deal, then they would go to war.
Yeah.
And I just want to add, so, in this period, the early republic to the mid republic, the years as Rome becomes the hegemon in Italy, this isn't a peaceful expansion. There's lots of war that takes place. There are wars that go on for decades, but essentially after they defeat someone, and this is what makes the Punic War so unique, is that they would not they wouldn't spike the football on you. They would be like, all right,
you guys are slaves
fight?
now. Yeah.
You can either join us, but they wouldn't enslave them. They would basically they would work with their leadership. They would form personal bonds with like tribal leadership, and they would become clients. They would serve Rome's interest. And usually that interest was directly to, one of these patriarchs, one of these leaders of the family. And the families, they were instrumental in like setting up these relationships with these different societies. So the first civilization that really becomes integrated into the Roman system were the Roman system. I'm having a harder time than usual with pronouncing normal words.
We're doing an episode about ancient Rome. There's going to be a lot of weird words, but civilization.
I mean, I'm talking about the basics right now.
Yeah.
So the first civilization that's integrated into Rome, the Latin cities. So the Latin cities and tribes that are in the surrounding regions. And these Latin regions were very similar to the Romans, culturally and linguistically, but they were independent of Rome. So the Roman state relied heavily on its leading families to manage the relationships with these neighboring groups. So for the Latin cities, so the Valeri family played a significant role in like the early integration process, creating these different patron systems and alliance systems and defense pacts and those types of things. And the Latin League is this coalition of Latin-speaking cities and tribes in the region of Latium. Rome goes to war with the Latin League, and the war lasts 2 years, so between 340 and 338 BC. They dissolve the league, and they basically establish these kind of alliance systems with these like individual like city-state leaders, gradually integrating the elite into Roman society. And the carrot that Rome offered is that for some of these cities, they were granted full Roman citizenship, while others received the status of citizenship without the right to vote, which allowed them to maintain local autonomy, but they just really had to contribute soldiers to the Roman army. The Romans weren't really that concerned about like going into the Romans were not like the Assyrians. The ancient Assyrians would go into another civilization or society, and they would kill everyone, they would torture people, and then they would basically piss on their idols. Like they were just unspeakably cruel to the neighboring civilizations that they conquered. The Romans weren't like that. The Romans could be extremely cruel, but they had this kind of pragmatic approach to it where they'd be like, all right, we've defeated them in war. Now let's try to create something out of this. Like, you can become part of the system that we're creating. You can be part of this. You can be part of the solution, or you can, we'll annihilate you. So, I mean, they're in that regard, they were closer to like, how the Persians acted. But they were, they were mainly interested in manpower.
Right.
So procuring the manpower of these, different city states and different tribes to
military
fight
manpower, right?
Yeah, military manpower. So the Latin League is the first to be integrated. Then the Etruscans. So the Etruscans, they previously dominated Italy. They were conquered and integrated into the Roman system. They were clients to the Fabii family. And all these like classical history people are going to be listening to this and being like, man, you suck at pronouncing all this. Well, here's the thing. I don't sit around and talk about Rome to other people. So when I'm reading things, I just read it in my head and it comes out of my mouth.
Yeah, whatever it sounds like it. Yeah.
A lot of these words.
Yeah.
And I've also have, as our audience knows, a speech impediment. A real one. I do actually have one. So a similar approach was used with the Sabines. So they were a tribe that lived in the central Apennine region. That they were the clients of the Claudi family, who were originally of Sabine origin. Now the hardest society for the Romans to conquer and integrate were the Samnites, and the Samnites basically, they were Rome's mortal enemies during the age of the early to mid Republic. So the Romans had to fight them for about 50 years before they capitulated. So they fought 3 wars with them before they became an Italian ally. And they actually didn't. They're one of the few tribes or few groups that actually betrays Rome when Hannibal invades. They side with Hannibal after the Battle of Cannae during the Second Punic War, because they're like, I guess Rome's not that tough after all. Maybe we'll see what we can pick up and become the new dominant political class here when Hannibal sacks Rome, because that was a real possibility. There was a real possibility that Hannibal was going to succeed.
For sure. I mean, dude was fielding elephants, so yeah.
Well, I mean, they couldn't. There wasn't a single commander that they could field in Italy that could take him on. Like, they just had to avoid him, and they had to avoid for 10 years. They just had to basically flee from him and just run into cities, because it was just, he just outclassed everyone in a strategic sense. I mean, eventually they lose the war, but they lose the war just because like Carthage is like, fuck, this guy's gone renegade. We can't support him. So Hannibal did all this stuff on his own without the support of his state, which makes it even crazier. But I digress. So I guess to end this, because we're going to end around the start of the First Punic War. In 264 BC, when Rome goes to war with Carthage for the first time, the majority of those serving in the army were not Roman citizens. A Roman legion typically had around 4,000 to 5,000 infantry, supported by 300 cavalry. During the First Punic War, Rome raised multiple legions every year. And in the time of crisis or large-scale operations, Rome could field armies, with 4 to 6 legions at once.
Jesus.
So in total, Rome likely fielded between like 80,000 to 100,000 soldiers at different points during the First Punic War. And what the Punic Wars do is that since there is this external threat, it creates this bond between Italians to fight the outside threat. And in turn, it kind of creates this like proto-Italian identity among, not just Rome, but its Italian allies as well.
Sure.
And it sets the foundation, because I don't want to skip too ahead, because I think the Punic Wars deserve their own episodes, because I find the Punic Wars like the most fascinating story in ancient history.
Mm-hmm.
The generation that comes after the Punic Wars is basically like our World War II generation, like the greatest generation.
Mm-hmm.
This is the generation that kind of turns Rome. It's basically like World War II. Like it's equivalent to like the United States in World War II. Like what comes of Rome after the Punic Wars is that they're not just the Italian hegemony, they're the Mediterranean hegemony.
Right.
Because again, just 100 years before, roughly 100 years prior to the First Punic War, Rome was conquered by like a crude warlord. So
huge turnaround.
Yeah, it's a huge turnaround. So with that, I think I'll end this, and we will follow up this episode. Won't be a direct follow up, because this fucking shit takes an enormous amount of research to put together.
Yeah.
But gradually, I think doing a follow up on the Punic Wars, and even like the social wars, which happened after the Punic Wars. The social wars is a civil war that breaks out between the Italian allies. That is one of the bloodiest wars in Roman history. I think doing episodes on those would be really interesting. But let us know what you think. Is there anything that you would like to add? Or actually, no, there was something I did want to add before we conclude this. The Roman history part of it. The modern comparisons. So Rome expands its power through military might, but also through creating this network of alliances and if we want to call them proxies or different clients. It's very similar to how like how Iran has its different allies.
Mm-hmm.
And the example I want to use is that one of the reasons why the Israelis killed Qasem Soleimani, is that they knew, and the Israelis go after these guys, all these guys in Iran, in the Iranian military. They go after the guys.
I thought we killed Salami.
The U.S. did, but it was the Israelis who did it. It was due to Israeli political pressure. The reason why the Israelis go after these guys like Soleimani is they go after guys who manage their patron network. So the embassy strike that happened in Damascus in April?
Yeah.
The guys that they killed were the guys who managed the relationship with the Houthis, and another guy who managed the relationships with Hezbollah.
Mm-hmm.
So they actually intentionally go after those guys who manage relationships with different proxies, because a lot of that shit's in their head. You know what I mean? Like a lot of the arrangements that they have,
it's like
not
handshakes
written down.
Shit. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
They're handshakes, and they're built off these personal relationships. So they're like, well, we eliminate them. We rupture that relationship. And one of the reasons why the war in Yemen broke out in 2014, and it's like it sounds very simplistic, but this is what I was told um, Gregory Gauss, who's one of the leading experts on Saudi Arabia and Yemen in the country. He's the dean of international relations at Texas A&M. He told me that what happened was that the Saudis guy who handled Yemen, like the guy who managed the Yemen relationship, died.
Mm-hmm.
And there was just there was no one else in Saudi Arabia who could really figure out how to pick up all his networking that he'd already done. So the relationship just crumbled after this one guy. He was a prince. I forget which prince it was. I think it was. I could think on it, but I'll probably get it wrong a couple of times. But this prince who managed the relationship with the Houthis died, and of course there were other things, but he was the one who was keeping them from going to war, and the whole relationship crumbled. So that was kind of like the relationship that Rome had with a lot of its tribal allies, because you have to remember these allies, bro. It's hard to tell a clean history of this because there's so much war and there's so many periods of peace and there's so many periods of wars that it's really difficult to have this start. This is where the story begins. This is where they go to war. This is where Rome wins. It's the history is way more complex. It's they went to war, then they settled on some things, and they had a relationship with this person. This guy was brought into the fold. This guy
Somebody
died.
dies.
The relationship
Yeah,
soured.
exactly. Mm-hmm.
This guy did that. The relationship soured. They went to war. One of their neighbors had a problem with this person, so they went to war on behalf of their neighbor, who they valued more. It's extremely complex to describe the specifics, and you have to remember that we're basing this off just a handful of ancient historians who are telling this orally in a lot of regards. So it's hard to really understand the sophistication of these types of networks. But at the same time, these client these patron client relations are some of the primary movers in geopolitics. Who handles the relationship with that group? These personal relationships that form between these leaders. If something goes wrong within that relationship, it could lead to some really violent outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
So there was an ultimate point to this, and I think that's what I was trying to get to. But I was wondering if you had any thoughts on that.
I mean, it like a lot of the topics that we cover, we tend to want to go down all of the little rabbit holes, right? And I mean, when we were doing just the World War I series, we did 5 or 6 episodes of all of them were based on how did World War I start, right? We could potentially do the same thing for the Punic Wars, we could probably do several episodes from different angles on how does this all come together? So it's a difficult topic, but it's definitely very interesting.
Well, think about even just modern World War I. How many relationships were broken when Bismarck died?
Mm-hmm.
Or when Bismarck not only died, when he was removed from his position, when he was fired. A lot of policy changed instantly. Basically, the relationship that Germany had with Russia was completely got fucked up after Bismarck was removed, because then the general staff that starts driving German foreign policy afterwards was extremely hawkish on Russia. So there was this whole policy shift that created this antagonistic relationship that leads into World War. One of the reasons why the war happened, among dozens of other reasons. But you can also use this if you look at World War II. Joseph Podolsky of Poland he wanted to invade Germany when Hitler took power, he was the Poles were asking France to join them on a preemptive strike against Hitler in 1934, right after Hitler was elected. However, the following years, Podolsky and Germany actually had a pretty good they didn't have a bad relationship. When Podolsky died, that's actually when the relationship between Germany and Poland goes into the shitter.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, there's so much. Personal relationships really drive global affairs in many regards, and I think it's an underrated aspect when you're talking about great power politics.
Yeah, I agree.
But I guess we'll end with that.
Yeah.
So thanks everyone for listening to another episode of Bro History. You can rate and review the podcast. That is the number one way to support our show. And also, we are starting a Substack, or we did start a Substack, where we will be publishing interesting stuff. So we'll put the link to that Substack. It's Substack at Bro History. And we're just starting it, so there's not much on it yet. But there's one article that I wrote about a similar topic, but it deals with Rome's policy. Like I said in the beginning of the episodes, Rome's like policy from a greater holistic view. So it goes over Roman policy over essentially like a 500, 1,000 or 800 year period. But subscribe to it. Check it out. Danny, is there anything you'd like to add?
Keep talking to us on the YouTubes. I'm responding pretty frequently, so if you want to engage with us more directly, that's a great place to do it.
All right. Peace, guys.
Peace.